Hello, and welcome to a special Chicago Tonight Voices community conversation featuring hiding in plain sight, youth mental illness. My name is Tim Russell, Vice President, Community Engagement and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for WTTW and WFMT. And our purpose is to enrich lives, engage communities, and inspire exploration. Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness is a new two-part documentary presented by Ken Burns and co-directed by Erik Ewers and Christopher Loren Ewers. Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness will premiere on all WTTW platforms on tonight, Monday, June 27th at 9 p.m. Central, and Tuesday, June 28th at 9 p.m. Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness is following the journey of more than 20 young Americans from all over the country and all walks of life who have struggled and with thoughts and feelings that have troubled and at times overwhelmed them. Hiding in Plain Sight presents an unstinting look at both the seemingly insurmountable obstacle faced by those who live with mental disorders and the hope that many have found after the storm. Today, you will have the opportunity to preview selections from the film, and Paris Schutz, co-anchor of WTTW's Chicago Tonight, will moderate today's conversation. Before we get things going, I'd like to extend a very special thanks to supporters of WTTW Voices, who you can see listed here. In addition, I would like to thank our supporters of WTTW's presentation of Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness, which help us to fulfill our purpose to enrich lives, engage communities, and inspire exploration. Before we begin, if you or someone you know are in crisis or experiencing thoughts of suicide, please text the crisis line at texthello at 741-741 or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. Both services are free and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, let's watch the trailer for Hiding in Plain Sight, followed by Paris Schutz, co-anchor of WTTW's Chicago Tonight, who will moderate today's conversation.
I remember having sad thoughts and asking myself, like, what's wrong?
I'd look in the mirror and there's nothing wrong with me on the outside. There's absolutely nothing wrong to make sense of that pain.
My friends had no clue what I was going through.
In anything that I did, I couldn't find myself to be happy.
You need like an answer of what is going on.
It's the place where sadness leaves off and depression begins.
It feels like you want to cry, but when you try to cry and release it, there's nothing there.
It's the place where nervousness becomes anxiety.
Slowly started getting worse and worse over the weeks. I just stopped going out of my room sort of at all.
Where excitement becomes mania.
I'll feel so restless that one time I drove in the middle of the night to Pittsburgh just to turn around.
And habit becomes addiction.
If I take one pill, if I take one sip of a drink, it's over.
That continual usage becomes a coping method.
It's the place where simply living becomes painful.
I started to see things that weren't there.
I just saw a shadow standing in the corner. And then I started to see shadows in school.
I started to get bullied by people I considered my best friends.
Teachers say, "What is wrong with you?" And then I just start breaking down like, I don't want to talk about it.
I'll just cut myself or burn myself or bite myself so that I wouldn't feel all this pain that I felt inside of myself.
All of us are affected by mental health challenges in some way, whether in our own lives or the life of someone we know, often hiding in plain sight.
I'd go to school, you know, you put on a face, you're happy, you're bubbly, and then you eat lunch alone in the bathroom.
At that age, how are you ever gonna admit, I'm thinking of suicide?
When something abrupt like someone you know dying from suicide happens, it's very difficult to understand what to do from there.
These are the chronic issues of early life. About 75% of mental illness has onset before age 25. This is the problem that we all deal with in secret.
Help is available, and with the right treatments, you can feel better.
After my parents got divorced in 3rd grade, we started going to a counselor.
I think I don't actually give my therapist enough credit.
I need to be medicated. God, that sentence sounds... I need to be medicated.
I was on medications that they would put grown men on.
For many who have suffered silently, simply reaching out may be the most intimidating step of all. But the relief can be as indescribable as the pain once was.
Finding your person that can help you through times like that is extremely important. And once you start talking, then you'll realize that that's your person and that they can help you through these struggles and that you aren't alone.
You have value. You are worthy of love.
These are the journeys of more than 20 young Americans from all over the country and all walks of life, who have struggled with thoughts and feelings that have troubled and at times overwhelmed them. They share what they have learned about themselves, their families, and the world they live in. They speak for many of us. They speak to all of us.
Hi, everybody. It was a very powerful preview there. I want to thank you all for joining us and welcome everybody in here. My name is Paris Schutz. I am co-anchor of Chicago Tonight here in Chicago. And as Tim mentioned, we'll be previewing selections from Hiding in Plain Sight while discussing youth mental health in general. And mental health and mental illness, as all of you know, is one of the most significant health crises in the country right now, as pervasive as cancer and diabetes and heart disease. But as you saw in the film, it still often exists in secret and is endured in isolation. And as the film states, it's where sadness leaves off and depression begins, nervousness becomes anxiety, excitement becomes mania, and habit becomes addiction. And it's a place where living simply becomes painful. So we're going to get into all of these topics over the next hour. And I want to remind you that you're in listen-only mode, but it doesn't mean that you can't interact here. We do want to hear from everybody that's tuning in. We are going to try and get to all your comments and questions a little bit later on in this. But for now, I'm going to introduce our panel and thank them very much for joining us. First, we have Dr. Tara Gill. She's a psychologist and mental health consultant with Lurie Children's Center for Childhood Resilience. She's also an assistant professor at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine here in Chicago. And we have the brothers and co-directors of the film, Hiding in Plain Sight, Christopher Loren Ewers and Erik Ewers, filmmakers, renowned filmmakers, and longtime part of Ken Burns' production company, Florentine Films, and part of all kinds of amazing films that you've all watched here on Channel 11 and PBS. We also have Dr. Sarah Vinson, a physician who specializes in adult, child, and adolescent and forensic psychiatry. She's the founder of Loria Psych Group and Loria Forensics. And then sitting with the Ewers brothers, we have Angel, one of the subjects that you saw briefly there in the documentary. So a hearty thank you to all of you for joining us. And I will start with the filmmakers, Erik and Christopher. First of all, you're tasked with this massive project, digging into the problem of youth mental illness. So tell us how you narrowed down to these 20 subjects and how you chose your approach to telling this story.
Well, I'll start first by saying, when you say narrowed down, we filmed 25 subjects, 23 of which appear in the film. And it was only one individual who requested that she not be in the film after we had conducted the interview. And she was also 12 years old, so it made perfect sense. But literally, the other one was too old. His story was not in the youth category. But people like Angel, all of them wanted to tell their story, and the process was very organic.
Yeah, I mean, look at this guy. How could you not include him in a film?
Absolutely.
Any type of film. No, I mean, as Erik said, I think that we were incredibly fortunate. We did a year's worth of research before, we ever planned an in-person meeting. We would speak. We'd have a conversation with one person who would recommend somebody else, and it was almost like a handoff. It was so serendipitous. I mean, we got the most amazing, courageous individuals to share their experiences with us and ultimately with the world.
And the strategy was very, very simple. We wanted to create like a tapestry of lived experience across many genders, across cultural backgrounds, economic backgrounds, race. It was very important that it represent America and represent our nation's youth.
And Christopher and Erik, is there any preconceived notions you went in with that just completely got busted up as you? You said this is a process of discovery. So anything that you discovered that just surprised you?
Well, a big thing with Chris and I, I'll speak for myself, but I know I'm speaking for you too. We discovered ourselves. I think that's part of the magic that these 23 young people give us, because growing up, we knew nothing about mental health, but we did know something about mental illness. It just wasn't formalized into that term. It ran in our family. It ran within ourselves. At the time back then, when you're younger, you think your life is normal because you're living it. You don't have that hindsight as you get older to look back and realize that the things that we were going through were not everyday childhood and teen experiences. They were something else. And this film taught us how to take a look at ourselves. And if it can do that for us, we hope and believe it could do that for our audience.
Yeah, we're not unique at all. I think that our misunderstandings, misconceptions are pretty much standard. And I hate to say that too, because we, as a nation, we accept physical illness as a fact of life, right? We know that none of us are immune from the flu or cancer or heart disease, whatever it happens to be. Yet we other the experience of mental health challenges and mental illness. And it's a great way to put it. Like, we knew nothing about mental health, but we all know plenty about mental health challenges, mental illness. We're all on it on a spectrum. Not a single one of us is immune, from mental health challenges, just like we're all on the boat together when it comes to physical illness. I think that for my nuclear family, my wife and our 2 children, the experience of making this film, without getting into details, has completely turned our quality of lives and our health around. I can't thank Angel enough, and Morgan enough, and Yaneri enough, et cetera, because every single time we would meet these incredible people and ultimately do the interview, I remember sitting behind the camera thinking to myself, like, oh my, every one of them hit home to me. Every one of them I could relate with. And so, as Erik said, if it happened to us, it can happen to anybody. And
yeah, I feel like that's a universal experience, perhaps, that the viewers of this are going to have starting tonight. Angel, how difficult was it to sit in front of the camera to tell your story? Because you mentioned in the film, this is something you didn't want to talk about with anybody for a long time. So was it stressful to just sort of open up like that?
Honestly, it wasn't really, because once I did the interview, it kind of felt like I was talking to myself in there with the way that they had positioned it in my room. I don't know what came over me, but it felt like I was kind of talking into a mirror in a way, because you had the little camera with the mirror on it. Yep, he directed it. He was in the room, and I felt like I was just talking to myself and just letting everything out.
And remind our viewers about your story. You were diagnosed with PTSD. You had trauma very early on. So tell us about that.
It all really started. I didn't really care about my mental health until my friend Nathan died. And that's when I really started to focus on the way that people my age were being treated and how to properly deal with their problems and what was going on. Because in my school, there wasn't a whole bunch of people that like if you were feeling down or if there's a problem, they'd send you to a guidance counselor that had no idea what she was like, what they were doing. They didn't have any experience. But when he died, I wanted my school and other schools around me to have a place where if something like that happened to them, that they could have someone to talk to, unlike I did.
Dr. Vincent, you know, the film's called Hiding in Plain Sight, and we heard in the preview there just about how the fact that this is still happening and there's still a stigma and people are feel like they're enduring this all alone. Why, you know, given there has been more attention, you know, on mental health and mental illness, I feel like in the media, you know, we've focused on it a lot more, especially over the last few years, but why is it still something that people feel like they just have to endure on their own and they don't want to talk about it?
I do think it's getting better and we're moving in the right direction. But with mental health, there's still this judgment that can come with it. There can still sometimes be a moral overlay. There can still be people who don't really understand the symptoms for what they are. I think it's sometimes easier for people to wrap their head around physical injuries, but when it comes to psychic injuries that don't have bruises that people can see or x-ray results that show a broken limb, it's harder for people to really grasp the way that things could be harmed. But at the end of the day, the brain is an organ just like any other organ is. And the things that injure it are things like trauma. It just doesn't show up in the same way.
And Dr. Gill, you know, that's another, you bring up, Dr. Vincent, an interesting point in this film, because from the subjects I saw, almost everyone here had experienced some kind of trauma or an upbringing, you know, with alcohol and substance abuse or some kind of physical abuse. So, Dr. Gill, is it overgeneralizing to say that those are the things that normally precipitate mental illness, or is that a very common story?
Mm-hmm. So thank you. I think that mental illness can be organic, but it also can be influenced by your environment. There's a thing called social influences of health. So you may have practices in place to have a healthy lifestyle, but there may be other things like parental unemployment or substance abuse or homelessness that might create less opportunities for you to have optimal health. And with young people, they're very dependent upon the adults in their lives to be safe places to land, safe caregivers. And when you do not have as many healthy adults that you need, those are times when challenges can manifest.
And Dr. Vincent, I'll go back to you here. I think there have been a number of surveys in recent years that have shown that youth, you know, instances of depression, suicidal thoughts, anxiety have gone up, at least since the start of COVID-19. Can you just dig into some of the factors that you think are leading to this spike right now? And is this a real spike? This is not just perceived. I mean, this is really happening, right?
This is absolutely happening. I was able to look back at my hours in 2019 compared to the past few years, and I've literally doubled how much I'm working. And we have seen where people who may have been sort of on the border before have now tipped into mental health problems. We've seen where family units are stressed in ways that they weren't before, and that has an impact on the children. We've seen how being stuck inside meant that they didn't have their normal adaptive outlets for dealing with stress. And so maybe they ended up turning to things like substance use more than they would have before. And the reality is the past few years, this country has gone through a lot, and there are reasons that adults are uncertain about the future. And you can imagine being a young person who's never lived an adult life, and you're wondering, what is America going to be like for me for the next 20, 30, 40 years? So they have reason to be worried and to be concerned, and you can understand why this would contribute to increased anxiety, depression, and things like that.
And Dr. Gill, I mean, I think this is across the board, but can you kind of dig into within youth in the LGBTQ community, communities of color, it's even more pronounced right now. Can you talk about some of what the youth in those communities are facing as it relates to mental illness?
For sure. I think it's important for youth to have healthy models, and particularly when it comes to LGBTQ community. Oftentimes the tradition had been to suffer in silence or to keep your identity to yourself. And in those places, it's important to be able to be who you are, loud and proud. And so I think that the youth in this video that came out and spoke about the array of mental health challenges, as well as their lifestyles and identities, really make them brave and bold. We have to work a little bit harder to reduce some of the stigmas that are in place and to be more accepting and inclusive. I think this film is an example of how you can be inclusive and still get the message across in an optimal way. We heard people not being put in boxes, but to really elicit youth voice from young people and adolescents, and from those who looked very different from the typical person you might see that is struggling with mental illness. All youth, regardless of their identity or background, deserve healthy spaces for them to live, play, and work.
All right, well, let's take a look at our first clip from the film, and this has to do with the influence of school on mental health. Take a look.
If you're like about to take a test, you would think the end of the world was coming. I'm gonna fail this. I'm never gonna get into college or anything. I'm never gonna have a good life.
I'm like, I didn't do the homework. I can't take that test. I couldn't just do my best. I had to do perfect.
If I choose this, what if I don't choose that? Well, if I choose this, well, what if that's not the right decision? I wonder what the teacher's thinking of me. I wonder if she's gonna call on me. Oh, my mom's home. I didn't put the toothpaste back just right. Is that going to be okay? That's anxiety.
All right, so back to the filmmakers, Christopher and Erik. It's not just school, but a lot of your interviewees talk about the corrosive influence of social media and just how damaging that can be. So why don't you take us, just into what you learned about peer influences and about social media?
So it's really interesting. I think, in order to talk about social media, I think we first need to talk about how, adults, people of our generation and older, don't really understand social media. They don't understand the pressures that it puts on our youth these days, because we never experienced it for ourselves. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to diminish the impact or to dismiss the impact, when in fact it is undeniably impactful on our youth. I think that as you see in the film, that of course there are pros and cons. On the con side, of course, we're all familiar with the amount of time our youth are spending on their screens and social media, how instead of connecting us, which of course was the original idea, we're more isolated because of it, and also we're forced to to live a facade of sorts. Every single one of the youth, the young adults that we spoke with in the film, talk about how they feel an immense amount of pressure to live up to a certain look, a lifestyle, or whatever it has to be. And of course, as you're in your adolescence, those pressures already exist, and they're already immense. So we're basically adding, a grand piano on top of that. And there's of course the pro side as well, where we have to admit that there are also instances where isolated youth are actually finding a group, finding advice, finding help, finding support online. But I think that there's a great disparity. Disparity. I don't know why I threw a G in there. There's a great disparity between what's good and what's not.
I was going to say two very quick things that Angel, as well as a number of young people in the film, they say, I hate it. I actually really hate it, but I have to do it.
Right.
Because I'm a part of it. And it's an interesting thing as a parent to think about it that way. You don't want to deny your child a social life. And it's almost a criteria. Well, it's not almost, it's a criteria. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting and enlightening for me was Alexis, our Indigenous person from North Dakota. She says, they want to get mad at us for what we do. Who threw a laptop or a computer or a little game or put us in front of a movie as 2-year-olds, and they're mad at us. They're the ones who started feeding us since we were young. And I thought that was an amazing thing to say.
That's a great point. I think one of the subjects talk about if you're not on, they hate it, but if you're not on it, then you miss out on, social situation, or someone has a party, you didn't know about it, and you feel like the odd person out. Angel, what have you talked about? How it's you didn't find a whole lot of support initially at school. So how big a compounding factor was social media on what you've been going through?
It wasn't that crazy when it first started off, just because where I'm from, it was a very sensitive subject when all of this went down in my town. But social media became a very good outlet for us when we were trying to reach out to people and help other kids in our town and other people around the state, and have people that want to listen to my story and want to learn from what I've done. That's when I realized that it's like a catalyst to what we really wanted to do. And I didn't realize that at first.
So it could be used for good. There's just a lot of negative impacts it has. Dr. Vinson, what about that? How do you counsel people, and how has social media either exacerbated or helped the mental health challenges that you see?
So social media is just a part of life. We have these conversations about, online life versus real life. But for my teenagers, my tweens, online life is their real life. That is where they socialize. That is where they connect with other people. And so any kind of social history of a young person has to include information about their online life. Do their parents have their usernames? All these things that are now a routine part of our history, and really trying to understand what kids' day-to-day lives are like. And it's not universally a bad thing, but we do know that seeing other people's highlight reels, the pressure to always look perfect, the fear of missing out when you're seeing other people doing things that you weren't invited to or that you didn't know about, does absolutely have negative implications. And when people are passive with it, like when they're just consuming a lot of what other people are doing and they're not really using it to actively connect with people, that's when you start to see a higher incidence of negative mental health associations with it.
Dr. Gill, I want to bring this discussion to Illinois a little bit. As you know, there's new state law that gives students 5 mental health days off per year. Talk about that and how important you think that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's important to give young people the opportunity to start to identify when they're not okay, and to listen to them, not second guessing. Can you just push through? That was probably the more traditional model that we were raised on. Perfect attendance is king. But to really focus on, how are you feeling in this moment? Do you need to take a break, and asking for help? Young people seem to be a little bit more able to talk about mental illness than some of the adults that I know. So being able to express when you're not doing well, and then to not be penalized once they've actually expressed that they need a mental health day or they need support. So the law allows for up to 5 days where you can do just that. How it will be implemented is still up to discussion based on particular school districts. And I would imagine as time passes, there'll be more policies and legislation related to that. I think one of the things that will be important to consider is once schools know that youth are in trouble, what are some of the solutions that they're able to put in place in the educational system where all kids are learning to make sure that they are getting their mental health needs met. And I heard someone speak earlier about mental health versus mental illness. If we are not really capturing what it means to be mentally well, then we're kind of chasing, dog chasing the tail, and talking about mental illness.
Well, and sorry to interrupt, I guess we should go back to the basic there, delineate the difference between mental health and mental illness, or like these two concepts.
Yeah, so I think when you have health and wellness, you have that positive sense of self, you have healthy relationships from a trauma responsive way of thinking, you know skills for coping, more positive skills versus the more maladaptive coping skills. So safety, relationships, and the ability to self-regulate. When those things are out of whack, then there's more challenges. You might see the manifestation of mental illness. When you talked about depression or grief, those are things that are more on the line of, you know, not just something that was acute, but something that may have more chronic nature. And so we want to see in schools the opportunity like they have in Chicago, where they've built things called behavioral health teams, to be able to identify youth that are struggling with mental wellness, and then how do you get them connected to the right person. So as Angel bravely said, that he needed help from someone, but he got connected with the wrong person. A guidance counselor is not necessarily the right person when you are dealing with depression. So who would be that right person, and what skills can they put in place for you, or who can they refer you to? So that's an example.
And back to Christopher and Erik, I assume a lot of people, and I think some of the folks you interviewed struggle with this, is like, where is that line between just being sad about something and then knowing you have depression, or being nervous about something and then just having full-on anxiety, and how difficult it is it to decide, uh-oh, you know, I think something's really wrong and I need help, versus I'm sad about something right now?
I think for young people today, no different than any other generation, it's a journey. Their path to mental wellness or their path downward is a journey. It's a process of self-discovery. And unfortunately, the statistics say that it takes sometimes years before anyone actually seeks help. Patrick Kennedy says in the film, it's such a simple but incredibly informative comment. He says, you know, people like to say, well, it's not that bad. Well, compared to who? It's a personalized thing. So without that formal education, I think we're 100% committed to helping in any way, in our small way, to help move that needle forward in the name of education. The more education young people receive early on in life about this topic, just like we had health class in the past. I don't even know if they do that anymore. And they talk about nutrition, and they talk about exercise and the things that keep your body healthy. Why aren't we having curriculum that is dedicated to helping our brains and helping our feelings and our emotions? If that happened sooner, there would be more self-awareness. There would be preemptive, proactive measures to try to deal with this. You might talk to your parents when you're young and say, I'm really having a hard time with being social, with talking to other kids. So I think it's really tough. And education is probably one of the most, and awareness, one of the most important factors.
Yeah, I mean, we just need to change the shift of conversation. You know, I mean, we know more about the brain now than we ever have, and yet we still find it nearly impossible, you know, for our perceptions to change to go along with that advance in research. You know, I mean, it's what each one of Angel and his contemporaries are inspiring us to do through the film. You know, normalize this through talking about it, through sharing about it, you know, candidly, and you know, I mean, until we're able to do that collectively, you know, we're still going to be running up against these incredible hurdles. We'll still be really confused about our own mental health. You know, I mean, the process of working on this has been so clarifying for us. And again, you know, as we stated before, it can be the same for everybody. We just need to get on board.
And the simple premise of the film is relatability. Yeah. That's the number one thing we learned as a 53-year-old. I'm listening to McLean in the film, who's an 11-year-old boy talking about his issues, and I'm learning from him because I see myself in him, in his story. Relatability is what opens up our hearts and our minds and our voices to speak out.
Angel, what about you? What was that journey like for you to just realize, you know, you needed help, and initially you didn't get the right help, versus like, oh, well, you know, my friend died and I'm really mad and sad about it. How long a process was that for you?
The process was long, but it was also very enlightening, seeing, like, understanding, because at first I felt a great deal of like, I felt like it was my fault at first, and dealing with that added a lot more weight to it. And throughout time, it kind of enlightened me on how situations like that could affect people, and how it affected me, and how if someone did it right and you were going through that it could easily be fixed. Not fixed, but it could be lightened in a way if you properly take care of that person or their situation.
Dr. Vincent, I mean, do you see a lot of instances where the trauma just kind of goes untreated and then it manifests itself in these broader mental health challenges?
Absolutely. And when we look at people and their mental health journeys or their, path to mental illness, often you can see something that may have precipitated it or that predisposed them. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's hard to identify what that is. I think what is most important is that families and that people around kids make it a point to spend quality time with them, to really know them, to understand their baseline, because that allows you to more readily identify when something is starting to go in a direction that you don't want. If you don't have a good sense of that baseline, if you're not spending time with them, if you're not talking about things that matter on a regular basis, it's easier for things to spiral without catching the attention of people in that child's circle.
Dr. Gill, what about access right now? How is the country doing in terms of, giving every young person that needs it access to mental health? You mentioned in Chicago the coordinated response teams. How is access, especially in disadvantaged communities?
Not so good, Paris. I think there's just not enough service providers, and there's not enough representation in who's providing service, and that in combination with stigma, long waiting lists, not having the right education about who to contact and how to get services, even when you're insured, can cause lots of challenges. And it also creates health disparities. The longer it takes for you to get access to care, the more significant or severe your symptoms are going to be once you actually arrive. So you see people really more in acute care by the time they receive services, and that can be broken down based on like culture and community. There are also messages that people receive related to culture that says like, keep your business in your own house or don't talk to strangers. And there's historical reasons why people are mistrusting of strangers in the system. So I think that there's a need for multi-pronged approaches, more funding to get more services, more providers, more education, addressing things from a public health perspective. We can't just have one-on-one care. We really need to have systems, after school programs, people taking training such as youth mental health first aid that helps to position a regular layperson to be able to hear and observe a child's story and then be able to help them until they can get more significant support. So I don't think it's just a one-off fix, but it is a little bit of a travesty as an African-American provider to know that there's disparity in how people from various communities are either having delayed care or not access to care.
You said a lot of it is a cultural thing. Are you seeing, are there certain communities where coming out as LGBTQ is like even harder, or there's more of a stigma, or coming out with any kind of mental illness is looked at as weakness or just, toughen up or something like that?
So as Dr. Vincent mentioned earlier, things are improving, but there's still old school traditions that make it more difficult for people to be true to who they are and to be able to tell their own story. So I can't say enough how the youth in this video are brave and bold for just standing in their truth. And those who advocate for youth to continue to tell their stories are right up there with, in my opinion, the champions who need to be really supported in having more of those messages.
All right, speaking of the video, let's take a look at another clip. And this is talking about where some of these depressed or anxious thoughts could lead to suicide. Take a look.
It's a strange thing to look back on and think to myself, I really didn't care about anything at that point. Not caring if I wake up.
That moment that nothing else mattered to me, that I just threw myself in front of a moving car, I felt nothing.
I actually was like really scared.
And I went downstairs crying, and I told my mom what I did. And then she brought me to the hospital.
I still had a whole future that I had planned. I was planning the suicide, but at the same time, I was making plans to go out to the movies with my friends next week.
I asked my parents what would happen if I wasn't here, and I think that got them pretty worried.
And Christopher and Erik, there's McLean, as you mentioned there. Wow, I mean, what an incredibly powerful thing to say. What did all these subjects teach you about suicide and suicidal ideation, and how something can spiral out of control to that severe a point?
I'm glad you asked that question, because it was almost a revelation to me. I was that guy that went through life thinking, how could you fail to appreciate your existence? How could you just throw it away? That our older generations would just, toss those lines out. And you have to stop and say, what if you actually thought there was nothing that could ever help you, and every day is a torture to live? It's akin to self-medication in a way, where how can you not take that drug if it makes you feel better from the pain that you're experiencing? It really was a hard thing to understand. But once you, again, relatability, once you hear what they're going through, those people and those individuals in the world who are struggling to that degree, they think that's the only answer. And so again, it comes down to that educational aspect and that reaching out and realizing, just by the act of reaching out, Tom Insel says in the film, even a speed bump, a little bump in the road, is likely to steer someone away from an actual attempt, and they probably never will again.
It's also really important to mention too, one of the big things that we learned was, again, shifting our perceptions. Talking about suicide, saying the word suicide, does not promote suicide. It doesn't encourage suicide. It's quite the opposite. And also to face our fears around this. I mean, I have a daughter. She has had suicide ideation from a young age. And up until the experience of this and having these conversations, my wife and I were dismissing it. Like, oh, you're too young. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just upset. We were doing the worst thing we possibly could for our daughter, because of our own fears and misunderstandings. And now, I mean, it's a whole new world. These are the conversations. These are the discussions. These are the talking points. These are the realizations that need to happen in mass. And now. So, and again, it's just common sense. We're not talking about sea change of policy. We're not talking about something having to come from, the president's office or make its way through the Senate and Congress. We're talking about something that we can start doing this instant with one another, just talking and being open and trying to understand what it's like from somebody else's point of view. Key, one of the therapists in the film, makes a great point. Rather than asking what's wrong with you, or why in the world would you try to take your life, or why in the world did that person die by suicide, start asking, what happened to you? What don't I know? What don't I know? Yeah, what led to that? What can I do for you? As opposed to saying well, don't say that word. It's all been a revelation.
We've done a 180 in short.
Yeah.
Angel, what is the stigma like among your peers to talk not only about suicide, but all this stuff? Is it gotten better? Do your peers feel like they can talk about this more openly and not feel just so ashamed of it?
Yes. In Rhode Island, at least, like my community, before it was very frowned upon to openly talk about your feelings and what you're going through and how that made you act or react to certain things. But after we put our names out there, after we tried to help others, after we tried to tell our stories to people, I feel like they felt more comfortable talking about their experiences as well, and how they affected them, and how even like these little things are little bumps in the road for people, how that can cause you to have suicidal ideations, that this one thing is a nightmare to someone, and the other and someone else, it's nothing.
And just to say real quickly, your story and your friend's story is perhaps one of the most impactful and meaningful elements of the film, because none of you sat idle, and you stepped up to the plate in the name of Nathan, and there's nothing more beautiful than what you guys have done. And it's in our second episode, and I can never watch it without being so immensely proud and sad at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to remind everybody that we're happy to take your questions. Just submit them in the chat or the Q&A function, and I'll try to get to as many as I can, or any comments like that. But Dr. Vinson, what are the basic signs? You saw that little boy McLean saying, his parents started to get concerned when he said, "What would you do if I wasn't here?" or something like that. What are the signs that you counsel parents on to look for, when they discover their kid is suffering full-on anxiety, depression, or suicidal thoughts, and this isn't just some one-off issue?
Certainly. And so one of the things that I think is incredibly important is that you listen to them when they voice those concerns, that you don't minimize them, that you understand that children have their own internal experiences, their own emotional lives, and that when they say that, it shouldn't be taken any less seriously because it's a child or it's an adolescent that is expressing those thoughts. And even if they don't necessarily want to die that day or in that moment, the fact that they're in so much distress and pain that seems like the best way for them to convey it to you is a red flag in and of itself.
Dr. Gill, what about you? What are some of the warning signs that you caution parents to look out for just mental health problems in general?
Right, so I think we ask them to look for changes. So whether a child is who used to be friendly and outgoing is now withdrawn. If they used to eat a lot, now they have no appetite, or reverse of that, changes in sleep patterns and habits. And then you might also look for things like loss of joy, of things that they used to value, changes in relationships, changes in friend associations, increase risky behaviors without an explanation, drops in grades. You can go on and on, but those are some of the key things to start to try to unpack. There's not necessarily one direct way that tells you my kid is in trouble, but you see enough signs, and then that should kind of activate the parent or teachers ringing the bell to say, let's try to find out what's going on with this kid, and then not like what's wrong with them, but more from what happened to them. How can I be helpful? How can I get them to the person who can be helpful if it's not myself?
All right, let's get to the last clip we're going to show here, and this has to do with substance abuse and addiction. Take a look.
We all deal with things in different ways. Then we're all introduced to different things. So maybe it was an initial choice. Let's be honest. Maybe the first usage. Maybe it wasn't your choice. But that continual usage becomes a coping method.
So maybe you start drinking, or maybe you start smoking weed. That's how it begins. Self-medicating can look like prescription drugs, exercise, even addiction to porn. Anything that is out of balance of what your life would look like without it, because you're trying so hard to figure out how to fix what you may not even know you're trying to fix.
It originally started with just like taking a sip or two, just like walking by. And then it turned into like half a bottle of whiskey from a pantry.
I stayed inside, but I could go out if I had smoked weed.
My friends were smoking like marijuana, and
When they told me that it just brings you a place to pure happiness, I was completely open with trying it.
All right, so basic question, back to the filmmakers. What did you learn about the relationship between substance abuse addiction and mental illness?
I think I said it before, the fact that both he and Sarah said it so eloquently in the film that if you don't have something else to replace that coping method, being marijuana or alcohol or pills, whatever it may be, overeating, if you don't have a healthy coping method, they're just going to go back to that same thing because that is what works for them. And, you know, Key says it best. Of course you would do that. That's human nature. And who wouldn't until it becomes a problem? And that tipping point, like Lydia and Michaelan, Billy, who am I missing? There's so many people, Justin, Julie, Leah, it's almost all of them turned to some sort of self-medication. And, you know, you really can't blame them for that. You need an escape, and you're going to find it any way you can.
Dr. Gill, how common is it to see people who are suffering mental health challenges turn to addiction and substance abuse? And is addiction and substance abuse always tied to some kind of underlying mental health problem?
I think the norms in our society have changed about substances creating difficult messages for young people. And I do believe what has been discussed in the video in terms of doing adaptive things if they don't have a better solution. The tricky thing about your brain is that you don't necessarily know if you are the person who has the types of components physically that would allow you to become addicted in a way that another person would just have a habit. So I think it's really important to understand your family history and to continue to strengthen young people's skill sets for adopting positive coping mechanisms, and to provide education in schools and other places about substance abuse and the challenges that arise from that. Often it is comorbid or coinciding with mental illness, but I don't know if we can kind of unpack it in a sentence or two.
Dr. Vincent, what about you, especially with youth? How pervasive is it that kids, you know, from their early teens on up are going to turn to alcohol, drugs, pills as coping mechanisms?
Something available that alleviates that pain, it makes sense that they would turn to it. And so it's a matter of, one, identifying what they're going through, but two, giving them adaptive ways of coping. So we can't just say, don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, because I would say, at least with my patient population, marijuana is a much bigger issue than alcohol is now. But we can't just take what they're using away. We have to replace it with adaptive tools that aren't going to get them in trouble in the same way. And the other thing that I'll mention about substance use is availability is really a critical factor for young people. So if parents have it in the home, if it's easily accessible in the neighborhood, that's going to make it a lot more likely that they'll start using earlier. And because of the way the brain matures, the earlier a substance is introduced, the more likely it's going to be something that transitions from use to abuse, or from use to an actual disorder, what was formerly addiction.
Okay, I think you're breaking up a little bit there, but we got most of that answer. Angel, I want to go back to you because again, since you struggled to get the right help and the right resources, from your perspective, what needs to happen in the broader sense to get kids and youth the access they need, the care they need, and to make sure it's the right kind of care?
It needs to be less taboo to talk about problems that you have in your head, or just parents not understanding what their kids really mean when they tell them certain things about their own mental health. We just need to understand each other better and try to help us, like in the broad sense, really.
All right, I think that is a good note to leave it on. If there's any last minute questions from the audience, speak now or forever hold your peace. And I'm not seeing any coming through. So with that, I want to just thank all of you for talking about this. Obviously, an incredibly important subject. It takes a lot of bravery for so many people to come forward in this film. It's an amazing film, amazing experience, and my congratulations to all of you involved in it. We're going to have to leave it there. As a reminder, Hiding in Plain Sight, it premieres on all WTTW platforms on tonight, Monday, June 27th, 9 o'clock Central, and then tomorrow at 9 p.m. And of course, if you or someone you know are in crisis or experiencing thoughts of suicide, please text the crisis line. Text hello to 741-741 or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 8255. Both services are free and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We've also shared a short form in the chat. If you click it, you can submit ideas, stories, topics, and issues that you think that we need to be covering. So please take a moment to fill it out. Share your thoughts with us. Again, my thanks to everybody for being involved in this, and the viewers for tuning in. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time.